give a little bit of background, and then I know we sent out the agenda, so we'll kind of follow along with that. But essentially at our May committee or our May board meeting, we talked about the strategic plan for the state workforce board and how we can make the board effective in its actual role, which is helping with system alignment and assisting in the workforce development activities going throughout state government, especially as it pertains to WEO funding, but also the coordination of all services. So that meeting went really well. We had breakout sessions led by the National Governors Association, where folks got a chance to, put their opinions forward about things that we need to be doing. There was lots of good ideas shared. We had a virtual breakout session that I thought went as well as possible for a virtual breakout session. And we asked for feedback from folks about the meeting and their thoughts on moving forward in the development of the plan. And essentially, the operating committee for the state workforce board is going to kind of act as the touch point for us to do the work of the plan. And so you'll see a little later today how it's broken down. But for today and how it kind of will go is we're going to review the feedback from the meeting based on what folks were looking for from the board. And then look at our framework that we've adopted from the governor's strategic planning process. So for those of you who've been through that, it looks familiar. It's the same kind of template that Justin Kenny kind of has on hand at all times. So it's just a good framework for us to put this into context. But essentially what we're going to do is kind of take a section, and we're asking for all of you, because obviously you're not involved in the nitty-gritty service development directly, but your initial thoughts and feedback about some top line issues that you really want to see and prioritize for that section, and then decide who are the people that we need to be working with on the ground that are doing that service, whether it's in your agency or outside partners, to actually fully flesh out and develop that plan. And that at the next meeting, we review that, refine that section, and move on to the next one if there's time or if there's more that needs to be done. So we're hoping to maximize our time with you to get your, use this time to get your priorities, because obviously each of you have different areas and not all of it is relates to workforce development, but with each section, what are your top line priorities? And then we work with the necessary folks in your agencies and departments, stakeholders, different members of the board, business owners, to get their actual perspective and have us flesh out the plan in much greater detail. So unless there's any questions, I'll just kind of go through the survey feedback and through the breakout session feedback that we got from the last meeting. And it's not incredibly long, and I don't think anything is going to be very surprising to folks. Everyone see that all right?
You could make it a little bigger for the elderly people in the group. Thank you. That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. It is hard because when it screen shares, it actually even makes it smaller, and then I can't even see. So, I mean, the biggest thing that folks were looking for is overall coordination of the services, workforce services, which I think that's something that I think is ongoing between agencies and departments, but they want to see that from kind of a 50,000-foot view. Communication, both on our part to them, but also with job seekers and with employers about necessary services, necessary systems, things that are available to them, and then they want to see action. So a lot of folks on the board have been displeased kind of with our lack of action. I think for us, we've talked about a lot that it's really just the size of the board. It's impossible to get 55 people to do anything well. So we're trying to set up systems in place that can make the board do well, and hopefully by the end of the year it could possibly shrink. So that's kind of like from the surveys. The biggest thing is that they want to see us coordinating well with the committees. They want to see the programs and investments that the legislature allocates and the governor proposes to be a part of the workforce system, that like it all works in concert. And also our coordination with nonprofit folks within state government and also the private sector. That's the biggest thing for coordination. For communication, they want to hear from us more, which that Abby and I can do, not as part of the strategic plan, but as just a, communicate more with folks, but also for us to be communicating directly with employers and, between employers and the necessary agencies. And then also diversity was brought up at the meeting. We don't have a very diverse full board. I think that's something that we need to be cognizant of, especially as we're making this plan, that we're not foregoing important voices in the conversation. And also, identifying gaps in the workforce, identifying underserved populations that we might not be reaching and how to better reach them. And then action, they really want us to make sure that we follow through, at least in the beginning, with the plan, and also by creating tangible, measurable goals for the board that we can track and that folks on the board can hold us accountable for if we're not performing or living up to those standards. So that's kind of the overall what they're looking for from the strategic plan, which I think, is reasonable and makes sense. So from the breakout sessions, just some ideas that folks throughout, we talked about kind of some key pillars, which was relocation recruitment, workforce supports, system alignment, and then education and training. So we don't need to run through all these again. They're not super in depth, but it's just kind of like ideas that they had as assessment of the metrics for the current relocation recruitment efforts, or information sharing and best practices for developing and assisting employees, or technology available for employers, employer best practices. Workforce supports. This is one where I think from you all, what we're going to be looking for is when we get to this section, very clear scope about what the board's role is here, because as I'm sure many of you can imagine, when we talk about workforce development, everyone wants to get into housing policy, they want to get into benefits policy, they want to get into tax policy, they want to get into all these things. I don't believe that the board should be getting involved in those policy areas, but there is a role for the board to play in generally supporting increased investment in housing, generally supporting increased investment in broadband. Without getting involved into a policy debate between the legislature and the governor's office. And so I think on that section, these are kind of obviously all pretty straightforward, and each of your agencies are working on these things. We need to craft some language that talks about supporting existing infrastructure that's happening, but limiting the role of the board in getting involved in these policy debates, because while I'm confident that Adam and I would make sure the board stays focused, for years to come, we don't want to get into a situation where the board is weighing in on things far outside their scope. So that's just kind of a caveat there, that's what we'll be looking for from this group, especially as you all have your hands really deep in a lot of these policy areas that we should not be in the business of getting involved in. So system alignment, this one I think is the biggest piece of the board, and that's the one that we're going to start with today, is having the board really be the convener for the system and understanding how all of these things work together, understanding what metrics need to be tracked, understanding what gaps do we currently have in our system, and mapping that out. So I think that's a big one that the workforce board role can play, and also potentially help each of if you're, in the agency or department side, help you work within the system better, because your purview is usually your purview, and it's not always necessarily looking at it, the workforce piece of it from every different angle. So that's one thing I think that'll be a really big, a big role of the board, is really system alignment. How are we all moving in the same direction? And then education and training. Again, these are just ideas people throw out. They're not things that we need to necessarily do anything with, but a lot of it has to do with, observing, talking to employers about what they need, talking to different program providers, coordinating, communication channels that work well so that employers know who to talk to about X, Y, and Z training, working with, folks in AOE about career development and career pathways, and using the business members on our board to help inform any of those things when they need that assistance. So that's really, credentialing and training that is going to come up next year, I think, for us, or soon, with the training provider list. So that's kind of an aside, but those are kind of the big areas. And so from there, what we're really trying to do is put all of this in each of these areas, put them in the context of what the state workforce board role is. Our role is not to make policy. We're not creating the workforce system, we're enhancing it. So we kind of put it in the context of what NGA said, which is convener, connector, conductor. So as convener, we're kind of creating a vision, we're convening partners around it, we're getting information, and we're sharing information with relevant agencies, nonprofits, businesses, etc. You know, we're working together to solve problems that can be thought of from different perspectives, and not just my agency is solving this specific problem or my business has this specific problem. It's, you know, looking at that 50,000 foot level. Then also developing and model strategic partnerships, right? So this is developing that piece of it is what's the consistency, what's the cadence that needs to happen, what's the touch point that each agency or department needs to be involved in the loop, when do businesses need to be involved, when do we need to consult with folks on the ground, and also making sure that we have kind of the strategies regionally and sector based, also statewide, but regionally and sector based are kind of the main ones that we hear all the time. And then conductor. So how are we actually holding ourselves accountable as well as the system accountable, right? So we're using data points that we're actually tracking. We can track qualitative things as well, right? But we obviously want to make sure that we're tracking. We have clear performance metrics for all of the things that we're asking ourselves to do, so that in a year from now, we can look at the board and say, we did not measure up in these 5 areas and this is why, or we did measure up in these 5 areas and this is why. So we want to make sure that we're continuing to evaluate and assess our progress towards helping the workforce system and being a competitive or a good player in the workforce system. So I'll pause there for any questions before I kind of go into the template.
Has there been any, this is Chris, has there been any best practices, examples of states that have their workforce development boards that are following the convener, conductor, or excuse me, convener, connector, and conductor roles, and how that's been done? That we kind of get an idea from that. Yes.
So we have different goals than we do, obviously, because their workforce systems are different than ours. But that's one of the things that Rachel from NGA, obviously, who was at our last meeting, they're going to continue to help us when Abby and I are using input from you all and then input from our stakeholders. They're going to help us refine the language within the scope of some of these high performing boards. So we'll be using similar templates and, you know, kind of checking ourselves on best practices, but also adapting it to be like Vermont.
Tori, often in strategic planning, you start with vision, mission, sort of a baseline understanding of what you're trying to do, and move into the strategic planning with objectives and goals and strategies. And where does this committee fit in to your vision of how this is gonna? Which part are we giving you feedback on?
So
we're mission.
Yeah, so I think this committee I see as the top line level. So yeah, vision and mission, definitely. And we'll go through what we currently have as a vision. Like, I don't know when this is adapted from, but we have it as like the workforce board vision, adapting that to be more in line with what we're all looking for, but also kind of setting the priority for the different areas, so that you all from the top line are setting the priorities, and then we're working with the folks on the ground to, you know, develop the strategies, the necessary things that we're tracking, that type of stuff. So this committee is really focused on like the high level shepherding of the plan, and the different folks that we convene obviously will be working on the nitty gritty pieces of the plan, and then you'll get a chance to get another look at it and see, you know, are these things really in line with what we're looking for? So I can kind of pair us nicely to switch over. So again, if you've ever done strategic planning with the governor's office, you recognize this template. So right now, our vision is Vermont's employment demands will be met through a statewide coordinated and integrated system of workforce education, training, and development, where all Vermonters can connect to robust career pathways, advance along career ladders, and new Vermonters can quickly secure employment with a Vermont employer. So, you know, no one has to like think of things off the top of their head, but that's really what we're kind of like basing the plan off of. And so we're willing, obviously, to make changes. This is a picture, that's why it's cut off a little bit. But I can kind of just take people's pulse there for a second if they feel like that needs to be workshopped. Commissioner?
It's interesting because I was somewhat tangentially involved when the board looked at vision and mission, but so we just went through visioning and mission writing here at the department for internal, and one of the pieces of feedback we got on the vision we had wrote is, that could be the vision for the state of Vermont, right? So in this case, this could be the vision, the state's vision for meeting and addressing workforce issues and concerns. The question I come with reading this is, well, what is the vision for the board, right? So this doesn't actually, in my mind, create a vision for what the board should be. It talks about the vision of the state's workforce system. So that I just kind of say that as general feedback for us to think about.
Yeah.
Not suggesting a change, but I'd be curious to say, okay, what is the board's vision in this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
So maybe in response to Mike's comment there, it's simply just inserting at the beginning of this, the board shall create for the state the vision that's articulated there. Maybe chop out 30% of the words.
Got
it.
Yeah.
And come up with that statement that says, that's the vision, is that the state of Vermont will have this, but it's without the coordinating, without the connecting, conducting, and convening of the board, this won't happen.
Right.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think, at a top line level, like I mentioned, our goals are, system alignment, increased enhanced workforce coordination, education, training, facilitate relocation, recruitment. I think we could adapt this slightly so it fits more within that narrative. However, I guess, one of the first things I'd say is, are we hitting the mark here with those kind of 4 categories? Is there a different direction that the board needs to go? Because that also could change, kind of the work that we're doing. Oh, Heather, I saw your hand.
Yeah, just on that last point, I think we'll probably get into this, but when we say align workforce system, I can think of that in a lot of different ways. So I can think of it as aligning transitions at different points of the lifespan and what's happening with education and training, but I can also think of it as aligning the workforce system so that we reduce or eliminate redundancies. Like, I think that one needs a little bit of contemplation.
Okay. And from my perspective, and like obviously we can workshop the language, how I see that category, so we can change the language to match this or change the category altogether to make it match the words, is, the system, I don't know I'm not eloquent enough to say this well, but like the system is all actually working together. So I don't even know if it's more system coordination, or, if that life cycle piece is a part of it, if the, redundancies is a part, whatever it is. Like, I think the goal here is to have each player, which there's many, as you guys know, and you have different people within your agencies working on different workforce things. They actually are all working in tandem, and that the left hand and the right hand know what the other one is doing at all times. And it doesn't mean that everyone who's involved has to be fully aware, but I think people need to have a clear understanding of what their part is in the workforce system, especially at the agency department level, but also from an employer perspective. So that's how I see that one, but we could change that.
It sounds like, I think what you're saying is to align services.
Yeah.
Within the workforce system. I don't know. Another way to think about it, again, with align, is like making sure aligning the workforce system with the needs of employers. So that's kind of why I'm just saying, like, align can mean so many different things.
Right.
And I didn't even catch this before because it looked completely fine to me. But then as I start thinking more, I'm like, wait, what do we really mean about that?
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And I think we could wordsmith it to make it clearer. And that, Heather, ties nicely into, unless other folks have kind of some general first feedback, is, I mean, I guess I think for here, the two kind of decision points we need to discuss is with, with the vision, do you think that we need a rewrite to adapt it more closely to the board? And then the second one is us starting with our first section that we're working on is the alignment of the workforce system. So, let's establish as a group what that means so that we can give it, first of all, an accurate title, but also what are the top line things that we're working on in those. So I guess I'll start with the vision question. Do we need to adapt this? We don't need to do it on this call necessarily, but do we need to adapt this to better match what we're actually trying to do with the board?
Adam, just a question for you. When was it that the board revamped this? Because I just remember them putting in a lot of work and being, for the most part, in consensus with what came out of it. So, we could be opening Pandora's box here.
Yeah.
We want to if it's not, if it does what we need it to do to help us set goals, I would just caution against feeling like we need to rework it. But I think it was like, wasn't it 18 and 19 maybe?
Yeah.
I think it was a result of the, God, I forget, so 180, S183, what work, that committee?
189.
We could
189.
also change it so that this is the vision for Vermont's workforce system, and then maybe it's like strategic objective of the board is to assist in this process by, do the goals. Like we're going to be we're a piece of this system. We are not the whole system. We're not overseeing. This is not the strategic plan for workforce development. It's the strategic plan for the board. So I think we could adapt maybe like the board's objective underneath there, so that this is the top line vision for the system. This is how we play a role in the vision.
Just another piece, Tori, that I don't think any of us know yet what to expect from it. But, coming out of this last session was the legislature's interest in having a office of workforce expansion or office of workforce, whatever they want to call it. And so there's a group getting together to review that, to have kind of this chief workforce officer or office, if you will, at the governor's level. So I'd hate to also create that and have it be redundant with what's already in place or, what the board is already doing, which I think is the feedback we gave to the legislature when they were contemplating it. But I know none of us really know what that looks like yet, but we should just be mindful of it.
Yeah, and I think it also helps that, Adam is named as being on the board, obviously Sarah from your shop, and then I think Kendall from our office. So, we'll do what we can to make sure we're not causing redundancy. I do think it will end up being the recommendation of that committee to shrink the size of the board. I can't see a situation where it's not. So that'll be something that comes into play later, but I think regardless, the goals won't change, even if we have less people.
Tori, I think maybe it sounds like there's consensus that we could stick with the vision as it is, or if we can somehow tweak it so it's more the same vision as expressed, but we actually insert the words workforce board in there. So it's more specific to our actions.
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely do that. Okay, so then the first section that we're going to be focused on is the alignment of the workforce system. So I guess to start there, really what I'm looking for is, what does that mean to you? And then, I think we can kind of jump all over the place in terms of brainstorming, but it's like, what deliverables are we looking for from the board in terms of alignment, right? So, anyone can guess. I can start on that type. Like, what does that mean to you? What do you think what direction do we need to go with that? I can ask more specifically.
Tori, are we just brainstorming right now?
Yes, I'm not gonna write everything. Nothing you say right now is gonna be written as a strategic plan.
I can just I mean, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit earlier, so I apologize, but I can just repeat. I think there were 4 different concepts or notions that come to mind for me, and they're neither correct nor cut in stone, but I think the last one I said was alignment with employer need and what the workforce system is offering in terms of education and training. I think I also talked about alignment at key points of transition in like individuals' lifespan. So, you know, when you're leaving the K-12 system, I would even say, you know, I'm coming from education. So like when you're going from middle school to high school, and you can think about all those different kinds. When you're thinking of, like, there comes a time in your career where you need to upskill or reskill, like those kinds of things. Shoot, I had 2 others. They'll come to me. Those are the ones that come to mind that I already said.
Okay. I think I know one of them was like coordination of services.
Yeah, to reduce redundancy or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. What are other folks' thoughts on that?
I would also put in a continuum. What's the continuum look like, and be able to describe that? So from entry level to more advanced, and how can people access in and out is really important.
Yeah, that's a good one. What else? I mean, I guess like more broadly, even just, you know, trying to stay out of the, if you were from your agency's perspective or from your business's perspective, what are you looking for from the government for deliverables in terms of the workforce system? And just to put it into perspective, like if you're someone who's trying to help an employee, you're trying to recruit an employee, there are many different agencies and departments that have touch points in this area. Do they need services from AHS? Do they need, you know, help getting a job? Do they need funding do you need funding for on-the-job training? There's lots of different things all happening at once. So, you know, you don't need to be an expert, I guess, in the nitty-gritties of how it's working now, but just kind of like in a perfect world, what are we looking for out of this system?
Well, let me jump in with this. Before I took over Loso Janitorial, I was a consultant for about 22 years. And one of the projects I worked on was in New York City. And what they did was they revamped their websites for customers that would, if they were going to get a driver's license or whatever the problem was, it was customer centric. So instead of trying to figure out what agency to go to, it was all based off some high level criteria, like, okay, if I'm in high school looking for work or trying to figure out what would be a good career path for me, there might be a way of linking on that way. Just the thought process was different as opposed to trying to figure out what agency you're supposed to work with. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. Yeah, I mean, that's a service delivery, right? The outside facing of the system, and the user friendliness of the system.
The other thing I want to mention real quick, you're talking about what are some things like indicators, and I don't know if this is necessarily, it's more like an output type measure as opposed to outcome, but some type of during the period of a year, having some situations where you have employers come in to give feedback on the system and kind of prep them, kind of walk them through the system and get feedback from them along the way to help tweak it as needed to make sure it's the most effective system possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that fits well into the convene or connect category, right? If we were to do actual goals, is, you know, are we convening, even if it's just the employee members on the board, right? For, you know, without anyone else walking them through the system or getting some more employers. I think that's a good idea. Commissioner, I saw your hand.
This actually goes nicely with what Chris said. To me, thinking about the customers that are using the system as opposed to us who know the system, I think the biggest thing is that, you know, I saw up in the comments from the survey, the no wrong door approach, and that phrase probably gets overused, but really at the end of the day, and I'm thinking about it even just in terms of what we've been doing recently with the Afghan refugee new American population, is that we're having to convene massive amounts of resources from like 5 or 6 or 7 different agencies, depending, to try to coordinate across agency the different resources that exist, depending on whether they have a housing need, an education need, an employment need, healthcare need. And so, trying to figure out, one, how to help with awareness, so people know, depending on what their need is, who owns that, because many times they just don't know which agency or department owns the
Right.
need that they have. Or two, trying to figure out a way to make it so it's user focused, so that they're coming in through a general intake, and it doesn't matter, and we'll figure out who needs to be connected with them on the back end. But that seems to be the when I think about the board, right, we can talk about the internal within state government, trying to streamline the process and reduce duplication and waste, and find more efficiency on the outside. It's all about ease of access for services.
Yeah.
Tori, I
Right.
would insert just leadership and communication. So I think that covers a lot of what's been said, and by example of that specifically, I think members of the system, of the service providers, but also the community at large, the users and the employers, need to see the board as that convener, as that leadership, as the communicator, so that everything is coming through a coordinated effort. Right now, that just simply doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah. What I'm hearing is kind of like service delivery is essentially what we mean. Like successful service delivery is really what we're looking for when we're talking about system alignment, right? That like it's user friendly, people know where to go. If they, they call one agency, they get sent to the right place. And I think that's helpful for us in terms of if we're trying to decide what we're tracking. So, if we're talking about breakthrough indicators, I don't necessarily know what the indicator would be because we're not tracking this data now, but looking at, number of people in the system, what services are they accessing? What are the outcomes of what they're accessing? Is there a touch point afterwards? What other, if we were gonna say we're tracking a perfectly aligned system, right? We want to ultimately have a perfectly aligned system. Like what are some of the things that you would point to say, yeah, we know it's aligned because of X, Y, and Z, or, like that type of mentality for us to start thinking about if we're going to track some of this progress. Like, I mean, even I think, Chris, one thing could be as simple as, did they do their yearly walkthrough with business owners through the system, right? And get feedback. That could be one thing you track, is like, you have to check that off your list every year. But what else?
I mean, it should also be something associated with the one-stop shops, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, the one benefit is that because we haven't contracted that yet, a lot of this work can start to inform how that contract can look. So yeah, definitely.
I'm
It's
trying to
kinda
get my arms. I'm sorry. I'll wait.
No, go ahead, Chris, because I think I was going to jump off your point.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm just trying to get my arms around the board's role with the vision, right? Because I mean, in actuality, a lot of the same players are on the board are the ones that are implementing the system in one shape or form or another. But we're also kind of serving in this advisory slash, I don't want to call it like accreditation, but like just kind of like approving various aspects of how this system is being put together. And maybe I'm getting it wrong. I'm just trying to understand what's the most effective use of our time as board members to.
In a perfect world, they would be monitoring instead of approving. I would like to see the board be able to monitor the metrics of the in an aligned workforce, right? Like monitor the metrics of the system, figure out where we're underperforming or overperforming, talk with those folks who are working in those agencies and get to the heart of why we may be underperforming or overperforming in certain areas. Because a lot of times it might be completely out of their control and it's something that we don't know about, but it sheds light. The board can look at these things where it's like, we're really not doing very well in getting this type of population in the door, even though they qualify for WIOA services. Why is that? Because we haven't dedicated X, Y, and Z to this thing. So what I see the board really doing in a lot of these areas is almost being like a umpire, kind of calling the shots, but not, we're not actually, I guess that's a bad analogy. We're kind of more like, we're looking into it and we're curious and investigating and looking, and without kind of judgment or making a declaration, but helping figure out where to improve the workforce system. So it's actually in real time monitoring the work that's going on instead of approving a plan, not doing anything about it or hearing anything about it for 3 years and then approving a new plan and then, kind of rinse, repeat, whatever. So that's how I see it. So at least in the system alignment category. Heather, do you want to go?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of was thinking, in addition to like asking the service providers, it almost seems like there needs to be some way to capture the experience of participants who are getting these services. So, what was their perception? Was it a pretty seamless experience?
Right.
Can you see a reduction in the number of times they were, shuffled around to people?
Yeah.
I mean, none of these
agree.
are easy to get, but like, I
Right.
think that's kind of what would be a real core indicator to track and see,
Right.
is this meeting at least how we've been talking about the alignment?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Commissioner,
That's
is that
good.
a new hand or an old hand?
It's an old hand, sorry. I was gonna say though, we should come up with a better word, or a different word, I should say, not better, than monitoring. Because monitoring for a lot of people is like auditing.
Yeah.
And so, but to your point, right, like the idea is the board can keep its finger on the pulse of the players in the system, whether through metrics or through town hall meetings or surveying, right? And then be able to either feed that information back to the appropriate agencies and divisions, or help to develop policy, or, let's say there's funding needed for a specific internship or apprenticeship program. The board could receive that information and then work with the appropriate departments and agencies to develop whatever the request is going to be to the legislature and to the governor, things of that nature. So I'm, definitely, I think on the same page there.
Yeah,
like
because I
providing
also see
feedback.
it. Oh, I also see it as like, we hear from the legislature all the time. Well, how did that work? How did that work? How did that work? And the agencies are not staffed up enough fully to be like their own tracker. They only kind of have their level of, so that's the other thing is like, from this, how I see it, in a real world example is obviously everyone knows we asked for more money for the pilot programs than we got, and we only have the 3. If we're tracking and monitoring, use different word than monitoring, but if we're tracking and looking at those and we can point to concrete examples of them being successful, we can go to the legislature and say, we recommend increasing the spend to give them what they're really looking for because we've seen success X, Y, and Z, but it's just underfunded and not working. So I think on both sides, I think it could be effective. I need to figure out, we can thesaurus it. I know, I understand what you're saying by monitoring, because that does come with the idea that like we're going to be enforcing something, which are not necessarily enforcing. However, I would see more corrective actions being taken if.
Right, we're not monitoring for compliance, right? We're monitoring.
Right, it's not a compliance report. It's exactly. It's about, system improvement. So I think that's a valid change.
What about using the word tracking? Just tracking the data.
Tracking's good. Simple.
I think too, the board has never flexed its like leverage muscle, right? So there's, besides the state people who are on the board, which we know the legislature doesn't care about, but there's, there's a large group of community partners and employers, right? And that's where I think it does have some sway or pull behind it if we wanted to use it, right? Because it provides, it's the same way like an industry association works, right? So we should be thinking about it in terms of when we recommend policy or investment. It's not the board as in Tory, but the board as in its members, which should be predominantly business.
Right. No, that's helpful. So in terms of this top line goal, align workforce system, what do we think about that? I mean, I think we get a lot to go on from some of the suggestions you all made there, but I want to make sure that when we're workshopping it, we're kind of working towards this one thing. You know, is it like coordinate and track workforce system? Like what do we really see the activity there as?
I think to your point, I think it would, each one of us, except for maybe Chris, but I'm trying to think of like outside state government or or those of us that receive funding from the government in some way, shape, or form, you know, that we're always focused on meeting the metrics that are set forth in the money that's given to us, whether it's state dollars or federal dollars, right? But we're not always thinking about where does this intersect or overlap, right? So one of the things that I think the board can, when it, to Heather's point about aligning, in my mind, there's aligning the resources to make sure there's not duplication or waste, and also aligning it so that we're developing, we have a workforce system that aligns with the needs of employers. So part of that, I think, is knowing the entire system. So being able to have that 100,000-foot view to know who the players are and the services they're providing, and not having redundancy in the system unless it's designed to have redundancy. And then to the point of what we were trying to do before, you know, convening employers to constantly have a feedback loop to hear what their struggles are and their needs are, so that we're always working towards a system that perfectly aligns with what their needs are. Okay. And I think it's also being able to anticipate the future needs, right? So part of that is that whole idea of not just what the need is now, but if we know there's going to be a need in 2 years, what's the work we need to be doing now to be able to meet the need in 2 years when it gets here?
Yeah, definitely. Adam?
That's exactly what I was just going to say. You know, I like the fact that it says align workforce system. So that means it's not currently aligned, right? So we're looking forward, and if we always keep that in mind, that the minute we do something that's already out of alignment, is that we just have to have that constant feedback loop and always be looking ahead. So I think this you can never accomplish, and we should accept that and hold that as the reality we live in, and always be working to look over the horizon.
Yeah, I think that's good. So this is obviously very helpful, and again, as I kind of mentioned, how this will work is we get your kind of 50,000-foot view perspectives, and then we flesh that out with different groups and organizations or different relevant people on the board, one-on-one meetings, etc., and with NGA to develop a more clear kind of, it'll also be in a written document, but a clear kind of, here's our bullet point with how we convene, connect, conduct, here are our indicators, etc. And then we come back to you with what we fleshed out and get more feedback and kind of rinse, repeat, as I said, and then move to the next one. So that's just kind of what we're next. I think the two kind of key things that we need, and I think I'll start with the second one, and then we'll kind of move to Heather's question about, you know, again, what's our definition of alignment? But the first one is, you know, who from your agencies or departments, you know, or business owners that, you know, need to be involved in this conversation specifically. And it's okay if you don't know off the top of your head, but what we're really looking for is kind of like a list of people that directly need to be involved in these conversations. Like obviously, like Commissioner Sarah Buxton needs to definitely be involved in, you know, how can the workforce system be aligned? I know there's folks at ACCD, Lindsay, that might need to be, you know, involved. Yeah, see Robin from AOE. So and then, you know, Joyce, like there's other folks in the higher ed system that you probably would, you know, think need to be a part of the conversation, or folks from your office. Jenny, I think for this one, maybe just at least at the, you know, and I know AHS provides so many services, but who do we need to talk to kind of about the entry points of each of these services, so that if someone comes in for, you know, maybe something in mental health, but they also need a job, we know exactly how to connect them. So just those types of things. And maybe, you know, again, people can put some thought into who those people are, but what we'll be really looking for is, you know, who are those people working on the ground day to day that could answer, you know, some very specific questions about the intake, et cetera. Okay, yeah, Tiffany, great. So folks can do that via email, or, you know, in the chat now. Abby and I will take note of that, and connect with those folks afterwards to start fleshing this stuff out. And then we'll also be working on some of these things with our business members and our committees and getting their input as well. So different sectors, so it won't just be the service providers. We'll be looking at it from kind of the outside looking in as well. Oh yeah, yep, definitely voc rehab or high ability. Great. So then oh, go ahead, Adam.
I'm on a Mac, so I don't have the chat function. It randomly appears for me. But I would say what really helpful for your work in the NGA folks is to go way down into the weeds with a few really local groups that are doing a lot of this work.
Yeah.
From across the state, you know, pick a different group, and then every region has different types of people who are involved in this.
Right.
But I think we should have their voice at some point in this conversation.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and maybe I'll connect with you about some of the Southern Vermont folks that we should, and then maybe who else. I mean, I know there's lots of RDCs that have connections and could tell you either they're the person or others. Yeah, the healthcare committee is now part of the workforce board. So that is the one good thing, is they're able to be a part of it, Jenny. Okay, so then just before we go, and hopefully, you know, maybe we need to extend the conversation, but I don't think it could take too long. It's just, you know, at least we don't need to necessarily define alignment, but at least giving us the direction, kind of as Heather mentioned in the chat, that, you know, what does align mean? And what I'm hearing is service delivery, you know, seamless service delivery is essentially what I'm hearing. But is that the right direction to be moving in, or is there something else you're looking for? Heather, you can weigh in if you feel one way or another.
I don't feel one way or another. I just want us to be a little bit more concrete.
Okay.
And part of this was, I think Adam had a great point, which is like something about you know, if something isn't aligned, and then I thought, well, how do we know that? So like, that's why I'm encouraging us to kind of get a little bit more specific about that. But I don't really have any skin in the game other than the things I already said, and right. I don't have any pride of ownership of those. They were just to get the ball rolling in terms of thinking about it. Okay.
Well, I think we can take the feedback, unless other folks have thoughts, we can take the feedback from today and just try to distill that, work with NGA, but try to distill that into, you know, in the description section, kind of like the clearly defined version of what we mean by an aligned system. And then obviously kind of get into the weeds with folks about the nuts and bolts. And then we'll bring to you our next iteration of it at our next committee meeting, if everyone's all right with that. Good. Any other thoughts or questions folks have? Great. All right. Well, thank you all for taking the time. Hopefully it gets sunny later today and you get to enjoy it. Chris, hopefully you get to sleep.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tori.
Yeah. Have a good one.